In the kingdom of stone and shadow, promises were currency, and the king was deeply in debt. Iris Pemberton had been told 3 things about King Dashiell: that he was a brute, that he was cold, and that he kept his secrets buried beneath the mountain his castle sat on. Her uncle, Alpha Pemberton, who had taken custody of Iris after her parents died in a fire that smelled less like accident and more like opportunity, had delivered this assessment over breakfast, with the same detached efficiency he used to inventory his pack's assets. He is dangerous, Iris, but useful, and you will make yourself useful in return. She had smiled. She had nodded. She had not mentioned that she planned to burn the man's kingdom to the ground. Now, standing before the iron gates of Blackwood Keep with her traveling trunk and a heart full of carefully organized fury, she revised her assessment of the situation. The keep was enormous. The walls were older than any she'd seen. Black stone fitted so precisely the mortar lines had vanished into history. Banners bearing the crest of a snarling black wolf snapped in the mountain wind. The guards who flanked the entryway looked at her and saw what she needed them to see: an omega, a political offering, the bride-to-be for their king. Something small, something manageable. He has good walls, her wolf observed approvingly. Very defensible. I like him already. Iris told the optimistic idiot inside her skull to be quiet. No, but the stonework is excellent. This is a man who maintains his fortifications. That shows character. She was here to find evidence of a crime, not to admire the masonry. We can do both. Inside, the great hall was a cavern of chilling grandeur. The air smelled of old stone, wood smoke, and something else, something wild and barely contained, like a storm in a glass jar. She catalogued it automatically. 6 guards visible, 3 exits including the one she'd entered through. Worn flagstones suggesting the heaviest traffic ran from the throne room toward the east corridor. Her mind was a map, and she was charting enemy territory. King Dashiell stood before the throne, not on it. He was not what the stories painted. They spoke of a brute, a cold-hearted tyrant who ruled with an iron fist. The man before her was tall and broad, yes, but he held his power with a stillness that was more unnerving than any display of aggression. His dark hair was slightly too long, brushing the collar of his simple black tunic. His face was all harsh angles and shadows, but his eyes were ancient. They were the color of a stormy sea, and they watched her approach with a weary intelligence that made her stomach drop. He looked less like a monster, and more like a man who hadn't slept in a year. He's sad, her wolf said, with the conviction of a creature who had decided to adopt a stray. We should fix that. We should not. Lady Iris? His voice was a low baritone, smooth but without warmth. It didn't echo in the vast hall. It seemed to be absorbed by the stone. Welcome to Blackwood. Your Majesty. She sank into a curtsy, her gaze fixed on the floor. A position of submission. A lie. From this angle she could see the scuffed toes of his boots and the faint tremor in his clenched fist. He was tense. Good. Rise. She did, meeting his gaze. She let a flicker of calculated fear show in her eyes. Let him think her intimidated. Let him underestimate her. It was the only weapon an Omega had in a kingdom of alphas. He smells like pine needles and cold air, and something that I can only describe as the concept of standing very still in a forest, her wolf reported helpfully. I am experiencing emotions about this. Iris was experiencing a migraine. I trust your journey was not too arduous, he said. It was a formality, devoid of genuine concern. It was pleasant, Your Majesty. The lands of your kingdom are formidable. The word hung in the air, a compliment and a challenge. A muscle ticked in his jaw. We survive. Tamsin will show you to your chambers. We will dine together this evening. It was a dismissal. He turned away before she could reply, his broad back a wall of its own. A woman stepped forward from the shadows near the throne. She was tall for a she-wolf, with sharp features and hair the color of wheat braided tightly back from her face. Her eyes, a pale, piercing blue, missed nothing. Her scent was crisp, disciplined. A beta, likely his second. Lady Iris. Tamsin's voice was clipped, professional. This way. Iris followed through corridors that smelled of centuries. The keep was a fortress, but it was also lived in. She caught the ghost of baking bread from somewhere deep in its walls, the distant clatter of a kitchen, the murmur of voices. It was not the cold tomb she'd expected. 6 months ago, her best friend Cora had been traveling near this border on an errand for Pemberton's pack. She had sent one last letter, her words cheerful, describing the jagged beauty of the Blackwood Mountains. Then, nothing. Pemberton's people said she was taken by rogues. Iris knew better. Rogues were desperate, but they weren't ghosts. They left tracks, witnesses, bodies. Cora had vanished as if the earth itself had swallowed her. And the last place she had been seen was within a day's ride of this keep. Her uncle had arranged the marriage. He'd called it a peace treaty between their packs, the great Alpha Pemberton, extending an olive branch to the reclusive king of Blackwood by offering his orphaned niece. Iris had called it an opportunity for her, not for him. Her new chambers were luxurious, a gilded cage with excellent thread count. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the tapestries. The bed was enormous, draped in furs that her wolf immediately wanted to roll in. A servant girl, no older than 16, with wide, nervous eyes, was already unpacking her things. "My name is Elspeth, my lady," the girl murmured, not quite meeting her eyes. "Thank you, Elspeth." Iris kept her tone gentle. Servants were invisible, which meant they saw everything. "This is a grand room." The king commanded the finest for his bride. Elspeth's hands fluttered over a silk dress with the careful reverence of someone handling a relic. His bride. The word settled in Iris's gut like a stone. She was here to play a part. The dutiful fiancée, the docile Omega, and all the while she would be searching. She would walk these halls, listen to the whispers, and she would find the truth of what happened to Cora. "We are going to be an excellent queen," her wolf announced. "We are going to be a spy. Those are not mutually exclusive." That night, dinner was an exercise in strained civility. The long, polished table separated them like a territorial border. The food was genuinely excellent: roasted pheasant, dark bread, a sharp-edged wine from some southern valley, and Iris catalogued it as intelligence. He fed his household well. Either he was generous or he wanted people grateful. Both were useful to know. She ate, she smiled when expected, she answered his perfunctory questions about her home territory while filing every detail. The way he held his goblet, left-handed, defensive side toward the door. The way his eyes tracked movement at the edge of his vision, even during conversation. The way he hadn't once looked at her the way men usually looked at Omegas. "Your uncle treats you well?" he asked, swirling the dark wine. The question sounded casual. It wasn't. "He is a generous guardian." The lie came easily. Alpha Pemberton was generous the way a locked door was generous. He gave you exactly enough room to move and called it freedom. Her parents had been dead 3 years. The fire had taken the house, the packlands, everything. And her uncle had swept in with condolences and paperwork and absorbed their territory into his own before the ashes were cold. He'd kept Iris because an Omega niece with investigative skills was a useful asset, and useful assets didn't get discarded. They got deployed. "Generous," Dashiell repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "Pemberton controls more territory now than any Alpha in the southern reaches. Generosity like that tends to come with conditions." It was a probe. He was baiting her, testing where her loyalties lay. "My uncle acts for the good of his people," she recited. A flicker of something, disappointment maybe, or disgust at the quality of her performance, crossed his face before it was gone. "Of course." He fell silent. The rest of the meal passed with only the clinking of silverware against porcelain. He wanted a real answer, her wolf observed. "He's lonely. He's a suspect. Lonely suspects are still lonely." In the corridor outside the great hall, Tamsin fell into step beside Dashiell. "Report," he said, as he said every evening. Tamsin consulted her mental ledger with the precision of a woman who had been delivering military briefings for 12 years. "Northern Patrol returned clean. Supply shipment arrives Thursday. The new mare bit Aldrich again." She paused. "And your bride picked the study lock in under 4 minutes this evening." Dashiell's stride didn't falter. I'm aware. You watched her do it, in the corridor mirror, for all 4 minutes. Another pause, surgical. Sir. I was assessing a security vulnerability. The lock or the woman? The lock. You've had that lock for 9 years and never once watched it with that expression. What expression? The one you're making right now, sir. Tamsin's face was perfectly neutral. She had a gift for saying devastating things while looking like she was discussing grain inventories. Will that be all? That will be all. Very good. I'll have the corridor mirror polished. She turned the corner before he could respond, which was, Dashiell suspected, entirely by design. Later, alone in her room, Iris paced. Her wolf was restless beneath her skin, pressing outward, not fighting her, just uncomfortable. She hadn't shifted in almost 2 weeks, and the itch of it was becoming a specific kind of awful, like wearing a coat that was 1 size too small. Her skin felt wrong. Her joints ached in a way that had nothing to do with the journey. She needed to shift. She knew she needed to shift. But shifting here, in enemy territory, meant being vulnerable. Wolf form meant no lockpicks, no blade, no clever words, just teeth and instinct, and the mortifying possibility that her wolf would do something catastrophic, like try to befriend the king's dog. We don't know that he has a dog, but if he does, I'm open to the friendship. Later. She would find somewhere safe to shift later. Right now she had work to do. She waited until the castle slept, until the moon was high and the only sounds were the sighing of the wind and the distant howl of a lone wolf on the mountain. Dressed in dark, practical clothing, she slipped from her room. The corridors were a maze of stone and shadow. She moved with a practiced silence, a ghost in the halls of the man she intended to destroy. Her goal was the king's study. She'd noted its location during her walk with Tamsin, a heavy oak door near the throne room. The lock was old but well made. It took her several tense minutes, her tools clicking softly in the silence, before she heard the satisfying thud of the bolt sliding back. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her. The room smelled of leather, old paper, and him. The scent was stronger here. Pine, winter air, and that deeply, primally wolf thing that made her wolf sit up and pay embarrassing attention. She pushed it aside and focused. A massive desk dominated the room, covered in neat stacks of paper. Maps were pinned to one wall, marked with patrol routes and territorial lines. She started with the desk, her fingers flying through the documents, trade agreements, patrol reports, requests for aid from his villages. It was meticulously organized, the work of a diligent ruler, not a bloodthirsty tyrant. Frustration prickled at her. Where were the dark secrets? Where was the evidence of the monster she'd been promised? Maybe there isn't a monster, her wolf suggested. Maybe we should consider. She was not considering anything. She was investigating. Her eyes caught on a large, leather-bound ledger tucked away on a lower shelf. Unmarked. She pulled it out, her heart accelerating. She opened it. It wasn't a record of prisoners or illicit dealings. It was a list of names. Dozens of them. All female. Beside each name was a date, a location, and a notation. Kaylin, Silver Creek Crossing, injuries tended. Sabra, southern border, malnourished. Neve, rogue camp raid, 3 months with child. And then she saw it, a name that made the air leave her lungs. Cora, Blackwood border, 6 months prior. Status, safe. Safe. The word mocked her. What did it mean? Safe in a dungeon? Safe in a grave dressed up with a kind word? She scanned the rest of the page, her hands shaking. The ledger was filled with records of medical supplies, bandages, wolfsbane for pain, splints, suture kits, far more than a castle household would ever need. And all of it was marked for delivery to the West Wing, the old, supposedly abandoned part of the keep. A floorboard creaked behind her. Iris froze. She spun around, a small blade appearing in her hand. Dashiell stood in the doorway, a single candle in his hand casting his face in flickering shadow. He wasn't angry. He was utterly, terrifyingly calm. His gaze dropped from her face, to the blade, to the open ledger on his desk. "I had hoped I was wrong about you," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I had hoped this was just a political marriage. But you're a spy." "Where is she?" Iris demanded, all pretense gone. The meek Omega was dead. "What did you do with Cora?" He didn't answer immediately. He stepped into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. He placed the candle on the desk, the flame dancing in his storm-gray eyes. "You believe I harmed her?" It wasn't a question. "She disappeared in your territory. Don't play games with me." "The game," he said, his voice laced with a bitterness that felt ancient, "is not mine. It's your uncle's, the one you serve." "I serve the truth." He let out a short, harsh laugh. "The truth. The truth is a commodity Pemberton cannot afford. He sent you to find a monster, didn't he? A reason to justify breaking our treaty. A way to seize my lands. They sent me to find my friend." His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something that caught her off guard because it looked like recognition. Like he knew what it cost to lose someone and refused to stop looking. "What was in her last letter?" he asked. The question was so unexpected it disarmed her. "She wrote about the mountains," Iris whispered. "She said they were beautiful." "They are," he agreed softly. She was right. But they are also dangerous. Not because of rogues, because of hunters. He leaned forward, his gaze pinning her. "There are packs in the outer territories. Small, struggling, desperate for omegas. Not enough to sustain themselves. And there are men who have found a way to supply that demand. Omegas disappear from roads and crossings, and they reappear in packs hundreds of miles away, bonded to strangers. No one asks how they got there. The packs that receive them pay in money, loyalty, territory. And the man who arranges it all grows more powerful with every omega that vanishes." Iris stared at him. The shape of it was monstrous and perfectly logical at the same time. A supply chain built on people. Pemberton had assured everyone the borders were safe. "You don't believe me," he straightened. "You believe the stories, the cold king in his dark castle." He sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion that came from somewhere deeper than one sleepless night. "You found the ledger. You know where the supplies are going. You are a good investigator, I'll grant you that. But you've been following the wrong map." He picked up the candle. Then he paused, as if weighing something he'd been turning over for hours. "I need you to understand what I'm about to do, and why. I am going to show you something that could destroy everything I've built. If you report what you see to your uncle, people will die. Not a metaphor, not a political consequence. Women and children will be dragged from their beds. Then why show me? Because you will find it anyway." His voice was flat, certain. "You picked my study lock in 4 minutes. You found the ledger on your first night. You are the best investigator Pemberton has, and he sent you here specifically because you are relentless. If I keep you ignorant, you will keep digging, and you will stumble into the truth at the worst possible moment. In a letter to your uncle? In a report you don't understand the consequences of? The only version of this that doesn't end in disaster is the one where you see the full picture and make a choice with open eyes." He held the candle between them, and the flame threw shadows across his face. "Your uncle told you I was a monster. Your friend vanished near my border. Every piece of evidence you have points to me. And yet you asked me, what was in her last letter? Not, where did you bury her? You asked about mountains, about beauty." Something shifted in his expression. A spy sent to find a monster doesn't ask those questions. A woman looking for her friend does. He picked up the candle. "I am betting 50 lives on the fact that I can tell the difference." He walked to a section of the stone wall, pressed a sequence of stones, and with a low groan, a section swung inward, revealing a dark descending staircase. Her breath hitched. He knew. He knew who she was, what she was doing, from the very beginning. Every polite conversation, every shared meal had been a test. and she had been performing for an audience that was already reading her script. "I told you he was clever," her wolf said, with the deeply inappropriate satisfaction of someone who had been right. Blade still in hand, she followed him down. The air grew warmer as they descended, and the scent of herbs and clean linen began to overpower the damp stone. A low murmur of voices reached her, soft, feminine, and then laughter. It was the last thing she expected to hear beneath a castle she'd been told was built on cruelty. The staircase opened into a long, torchlit corridor. Doors lined the walls. It wasn't a dungeon. It was a dormitory. They passed an open door, and Iris saw two young she-wolves sitting on a bed, mending a blanket, talking quietly. They looked up as the king passed, and they smiled, not with fear, with genuine warmth. "Your Majesty," one of them said. He inclined his head. "Anouk, Ludo." They continued past a well-stocked infirmary, where a healer hummed as she ground herbs, past a kitchen filled with the scent of baking bread, past a common room where a group of women sat around a fire, some holding infants, others weaving or reading. It was a community, a hidden world teeming with life, tucked inside the bones of the mountain. "I am going to cry," her wolf announced. "This is the best place I have ever been. We are never leaving." Dashiell stopped before a closed door at the end of the hall. "She's in here," he said quietly. "She helps run the infirmary. She has a healer's touch." He looked at Iris, his expression unreadable. "She is here by choice." Iris's hand trembled so hard she could barely turn the handle. The room was simple, clean. A desk covered in notes, shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, and standing at the window, looking out at a sliver of moonlit sky visible through a high grate, was a woman with familiar auburn hair. The woman turned, her eyes widened. "Iris?" Cora's voice was a ghost she had thought she'd never hear again. She was thinner, with a fine scar tracing her temple that hadn't been there before. But she was alive. She was whole. "Cora." Iris's voice broke. The blade fell from her numb fingers, clattering onto the stone floor. She stumbled forward, collapsing into her friend's arms. Cora held her tightly, both of them shaking. For a long moment they just clung to each other. A silent monument to 6 months of fear and despair and refusing to believe the worst. "I thought you were dead," Iris said into her shoulder. "I thought he killed you." Cora pulled back, her hands framing Iris's face. She glanced at Dashiell, who stood silently in the doorway. "No, Iris, he saved me." Over the next hour, sitting on the edge of Cora's cot, the truth unspooled. The hunters, the ambush on the road, the terror of being taken. Dashiell's patrols had intercepted them, a brutal fight in the dark. Cora had been wounded, terrified. He had brought her here, to this sanctuary he had carved out of the foundations of his own keep. 6 months, Cora. Iris's voice was raw. 6 months I thought you were dead. Why didn't you send word? Cora's face tightened. I tried. Dashiell's people tried. The first courier they sent south never came back. The second one made it as far as the border crossing and was turned away. Your uncle's guards had standing orders to detain anyone carrying sealed letters from Blackwood. We tried a third time through a merchant who owed Dashiell a favor. 2 weeks later, the merchant's wagon was found burned on the road. After that, Dashiell said the risk to the sanctuary was too great. Every failed attempt was a thread that could be followed back here. She was right to agree, Dashiell said quietly from the doorway. I told her the cost, and she chose their safety over her own need to be found. That took more courage than anything I've done. There are over 50 of us here, Iris, Cora said, her voice fierce. Women and children that nobody came looking for. People who disappeared from roads and towns and border crossings, and the world just moved on. He risks everything to give us a safe place. You built all this? Iris asked, looking at Dashiell. Her voice was barely audible. Someone had to, he said simply. No pride, just the flat finality of a man who had accepted a necessary, impossible burden. "Why not go public?" Iris demanded. The investigator in her wouldn't stop pushing, even now. "You're a king. You have standing. Bring these women before a regional council and let them testify." I did. His voice was flat. 4 years ago. I brought evidence to the Southern Alpha Conclave. Testimonies, supply records, names. 3 of the 5 alphas on that conclave were receiving omegas through Pemberton's network. They ruled my evidence unsubstantiated, called me a paranoid recluse, and within a month, 2 of the women who had agreed to testify disappeared from the safe house I'd placed them in. I never found them. He met her gaze. I learned that the system I was appealing to was the system I was fighting. After that, I stopped asking for permission and started building walls. Shame washed over Iris, hot and sickening. She had come here to destroy him. She had looked at this man and seen a monster, and all along, he had been doing the work the so-called civilized world refused to do. But the investigator didn't die that easily. She spent the next 2 days verifying. She talked to the women in the sanctuary without Dashiell present, sat with Anouk, who had been taken from a border market, with Sabra, who had been sold by her own Pax Beta to settle a debt, with the healer, who had been here longest and had watched Dashiell build this place room by room. She checked the supply records against what she'd seen in the study. She cross-referenced dates in the ledger with Cora's account of the ambush. Every thread she pulled confirmed the same story. Not because it was too neat. It wasn't neat at all. The timelines had gaps, the supply chains were messy. Some of the women contradicted each other on small details the way real witnesses always do. It was the imperfection that convinced her. A fabricated story would have been seamless. This one had the ragged edges of truth. On the 3rd morning, she found Dashiell in the study and stood in front of his desk. "I was sent to find proof of your corruption. My uncle, Alpha Pemberton, he arranged this marriage. He told me you were hoarding resources, building an army. He backed this alliance to get a spy inside your walls." "I know," he said. "I've spent 2 days trying to find a reason not to believe you. I checked your records. I interviewed your people without you present. I looked for the lie." She paused. "There isn't one." Something shifted in his face, not surprise, relief. The kind that comes from being believed after years of not being believed. "The question is, what will you do now, investigator?" She met his gaze. For the first time since she'd arrived, she wasn't performing. No mask, no angle. Just a woman standing in front of a man she'd been completely, catastrophically wrong about. "I stop searching for an enemy," she said, "and I start protecting the man I was sent to betray." Something flickered across his face, vulnerability, a crack in the fortress. For the first time, the King of Blackwood looked at her as a person, an equal. "Doing so will make you an enemy of your own pack," he warned, "of your own uncle. I've been his tool for long enough. It's time I became a weapon for the right side." The weeks that followed were a quiet transformation. Iris moved through the castle not as a spy, but as an apprentice. Dashiell, slowly, cautiously, began to let her in. He showed her the hidden maps, the ones that detailed the hunters' routes, their camps, the names of the corrupt border guards who took bribes to look the other way. She also discovered, during her 3rd visit to the sanctuary, that the women had a betting pool. Anouk explained it with the serene confidence of a bookie. "It started when the king brought you down here. He's never done that. He's brought people to the sanctuary before, but he's never looked at any of them the way he looked at you." She consulted a small, creased piece of paper covered in neat columns. "Ludo has 3 coppers on a confession by the winter solstice. Sabra thinks it'll take until spring, the pessimist. The healer has put an entire silver piece on. He will never say it out loud, she will have to kiss him first, and he will be so surprised he shifts on the spot. The healer is very specific in her bets." "You're all insane," Iris said. "We live under a castle," Anouk replied. "We take our entertainment where we find it." "Cora started it," Ludo added from across the room. "Cora did not start it," Cora said, from behind a stack of medical supplies. "Cora merely provided the initial seed funding and odds framework. These are different things." He was a brilliant strategist, but he was isolated. He had Tamsin, a handful of trusted warriors, and a circle so small it was less a circle than a dot. He had been fighting this war alone for years, and it showed in the way he worked, methodical, exhaustive, and entirely unwilling to delegate because delegation meant trust, and trust meant risk, and risk meant more names on the list he kept in the dark. Iris, with her investigator's mind, saw patterns he had missed. She began spending evenings in his study, which, she noted, with private amusement, he had not changed the lock on since she'd picked it, poring over reports and cross-referencing dates while he worked silently at the other end of the desk. It became a routine. He didn't invite her. She simply appeared, and he simply allowed it. And neither of them acknowledged that this was unusual. Cohabiting, her wolf called it, with deep satisfaction. We are cohabiting. We are sharing a desk. Same thing. She learned things about him in those quiet hours that no amount of spying could have uncovered. He read with his whole body, leaning forward when something interested him, leaning back when it didn't. He forgot to eat unless Tamsin brought food to the study door and left it without comment, a ritual that had clearly been ongoing for years. He rubbed the scar along his left knuckle when he was frustrated, a gesture so small and unconscious that Iris suspected no one else had ever noticed it. We notice everything about him, her wolf observed. This is called love. This is called intelligence gathering. Sure. On the fourth evening, she caught herself staring at his hands instead of the supply ledger. She'd been watching him turn a page. Just turn a page, the most mundane act in human civilization, and had lost 7 minutes to the way his fingers moved against the paper. 7 minutes. She could crack a cipher in 7 minutes. She could map an escape route in 7 minutes. She had just spent 7 minutes watching a man read. She looked down at her own notes. She had written the word hands in the margin of a patrol report. She crossed it out so hard the quill tore the paper. We are a very good spy, her wolf said encouragingly. We are a disaster, a spy disaster, the best kind. On one such evening, Tamsin entered without knocking, a privilege she exercised exactly once per day, always at the worst possible moment, and found them at the desk, heads bent over the same map, close enough that Iris could count the threads of silver in his dark hair. Tamsin looked at them. She looked at the single candle between them. She looked at the 2 untouched plates of food she had left at the door 3 hours ago. Sir, she said, a word. In the corridor, through a door that Iris could absolutely not hear through and was absolutely not pressing her ear against, Tamsin said something that Iris couldn't quite make out. Dashiell's response was low, clipped, and defensive. Tamsin's reply was perfectly audible, because Tamsin had spent 12 years calibrating exactly how much volume carried through that particular door. You have not eaten dinner in 4 days. You have changed your tunic twice today. You never change your tunic. And you are currently wearing your formal belt to a strategy session in your own study. Sir. A silence. Then Dashiell. The other belt was being repaired. Both of them. A longer silence. Will there be anything else, sir? Or shall I just notify the healer that you've contracted some kind of illness that makes you forget how food works whenever a specific woman is in the room? The door opened. Dashiell's face was perfectly composed. Tamsin's face was perfectly composed. Iris, who had absolutely not been listening, was perfectly composed. Nobody was fooling anyone, and everyone knew it. And the silence that followed was the funniest thing that had happened in Blackwood Keep in a decade. One evening, she found the pattern. She'd been comparing convoy dates against lunar cycles for 3 hours, and it clicked into place with the sickening certainty of a lock turning. They're not random, she told him, tracing a finger along a winding road on the map. They target omegas traveling during the new moon, when patrols are thinnest. And always, every single time, near trade towns controlled by Alpha Pemberton. Dashiell looked at her, and she watched the recognition land. Pemberton, your uncle. He's been expanding his territory for years. He's been the loudest voice calling my borders a threat to regional stability. He's not threatened by you, Iris said. and the cold fury in her heart had a name now. He's the broker, the supplier. Every Omega who disappears from these roads ends up in a pack that paid him for the privilege. In gold, in sworn wolves, in territory. That's how he's grown so fast. That's how he absorbed 6 border territories in 3 years, including my parents. He doesn't conquer, he trades, and the currency is people. She looked down at the map, at the constellation of red marks she'd been plotting for a week. Each one was a person. Each one was someone's Cora. The realization hit her quietly, without drama. Just a fact sliding into place like a key turning. She was the same, an Omega placed with an Alpha for her uncle's benefit. The only difference was that Pemberton hadn't needed to take her from a road. He'd taken her from a house fire. He arranged this marriage, Dashiell, not for peace, to shackle you, to keep his biggest threat distracted and docile while he operates in your shadow. The silence that followed was the kind that changes rooms. "You're sure?" he said, not questioning, measuring. "I am an investigator. This is what I do." She looked down at the map, at the constellation of red marks she'd been plotting for a week. Each one was a person. Each one was someone's Cora. "My uncle smells like soap and expensive leather, and underneath all of it, something rotten. I thought it was just his personality. It wasn't." "We are experiencing a complicated emotion," her wolf said, with unusual gentleness. "But we always knew." Dashiell was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the desk and placed his hand over hers, not clasping, not holding, just there, warm, steady, an anchor offered without conditions. "I'm sorry," he said, "that it's him." Iris looked at his hand on hers and felt something crack open inside her that she couldn't afford to examine right now. There will be time for grief later. Right now, there's work. He nodded and removed his hand. The warmth stayed, printed on her skin like a brand. 3 days later, she found him. It was past midnight. She couldn't sleep. The shift ache was worse now, 3 weeks without changing, and her wolf was a constant low-grade complaint at the edges of her mind. And she'd gone to the sanctuary to check on a young Omega named Sabra, who'd arrived feverish 2 days prior. She heard it from the corridor outside the infirmary. Not a sound exactly, an absence of sound, the kind of silence that has weight. She pushed the door open carefully and found Dashiell sitting on the floor beside an empty cot. Just sitting, his back against the stone wall, his head tipped back, his eyes closed. In front of him, on the cot's thin mattress, was a folded blanket and a child's knitted toy, a lopsided wolf with one ear longer than the other. She knew without asking. Someone hadn't made it. He didn't move when she entered, didn't open his eyes. She could see the line of his throat working, the rigid set of his jaw, the way his hands, those massive, capable hands that had disarmed 3 men in under a minute, were pressed flat against his thighs like he was trying to keep them from shaking. "Sit with him," her wolf said. Not cheerful now, not optimistic, just certain. She sat down beside him on the cold stone floor. She didn't say anything, she didn't touch him. She just sat there, close enough that her shoulder was almost against his, and let the silence have its shape. After a long time, he spoke. Her name was Lyra. She was 7. His voice was stripped bare, no baritone authority, no kingly composure, just a man's voice, raw and rough. "The hunters had her for 4 months before we found her. She was so small, Iris. The healer did everything she could. We were too late." Iris closed her eyes. 7. "I keep a list," he said. "The ones I couldn't save. It's longer than the other ledger, the one you found." He opened his eyes and looked at her, and she saw the full weight of it. Years of this. Years of running a secret war with insufficient resources against an enemy the world refused to acknowledge existed, and keeping a private tally of every loss. "You carry all of this alone," she said. It wasn't a question. "Who else?" He said it without self-pity, a statement of fact. "Me," she said. "Now, me." He stared at her. Then he closed his eyes again, and something in his posture shifted. Not relaxing exactly, but releasing, like a man who had been holding a door shut with his body for years and someone had finally come to help him brace it. They sat on the cold floor of the infirmary until the candles burned low, saying nothing, and it was the most honest conversation Iris had ever had. The shift ache broke the next morning. She'd been training with the guards in the practice yard, Tamsin's idea, delivered with the same enthusiasm one might use to announce a tax audit, when a messenger arrived at a dead sprint with news that a hunter convoy had been spotted on the northern road. The yard erupted into organized chaos. Guards scrambled for armor, Tamsin was already issuing orders, and Dashiell was there, striding through the yard with a focused calm that made everyone else move faster just by proximity. He stopped briefly to issue an instruction to Tamsin, and as he turned, his eyes found Iris across the yard. It was a look, not long, barely a second, but it carried something she hadn't been prepared for. Not concern, not warning. Trust. He was looking at her the way you look at someone who is already part of the plan. Her wolf, the delusional optimist, the creature who interpreted thrown shoes as romantic progress, received this look like a full-body blow. He trusts us. He trusts us. This is the greatest day of our life. We should shift and run alongside him. We should... The shift hit her like a wave breaking. One moment she was standing upright in the practice yard, holding a wooden training sword. The next moment she was not standing upright, and the training sword was clattering to the ground and her clothes were... Oh no. Oh, this was the worst possible. She stood in the yard on 4 legs, her torn tunic in a heap around her paws, a sleek gray wolf with amber eyes and the profound desire to sink into the flagstones and disappear. The yard had gone quiet. Every guard, every warrior, Tamsin, and worst of all, Dashiell, were staring at the spot where the king's composed Omega bride had been standing, and where there was now a deeply mortified wolf. "This is fine," her wolf said, because her wolf was clinically incapable of reading a room. "We look great. Our coat is excellent. He's going to be so impressed." Iris wanted to die. She wanted to reverse the shift immediately, except that her clothes were destroyed, and she was in the middle of a crowded yard. And the only thing worse than being an unexpected wolf was being an unexpected naked woman. Dashiell crossed the yard toward her. His expression was... she couldn't read it. His scent was doing something complicated. He stopped a few feet away and looked down at her. The silence was enormous. Then he crouched. Slowly, the way you approach something wild. He was at her eye level now, and this close, the scent of him was overwhelming. Pine and winter air, and that deep wolf note that her animal brain received as safe, pack, stay. "When did you last shift?" he asked quietly. No judgment, no amusement, just the tone of someone who recognized what 3 weeks of suppressed shifting looked like. She couldn't answer. She was a wolf. He seemed to realize this. The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. He shrugged off his outer cloak, a heavy dark thing that smelled entirely too much like him, and draped it carefully over her. "Tamsin," he said, without looking away from Iris. "Clear the yard." "Already done, sir." He held the cloak around her like a shield while the yard emptied. She shifted back under its cover. The return to human form was disorienting, as always, the world too bright and too loud for the first few seconds, and emerged clutching his cloak around herself with as much dignity as a person in that situation could muster, which was none. 3 weeks, she said, her voice rough from the shift. "I haven't shifted in 3 weeks. I didn't want to be vulnerable in unfamiliar territory." 3 weeks is too long, he said, and there was an undercurrent in his voice that she recognized from the infirmary floor. That quality of someone who understood, at a bodily level, what it cost to suppress a fundamental part of yourself. "I know." "Tomorrow evening," he said, "there's a run. The pack takes the mountain trail after sundown. You should join us." It was not a royal command. It was an invitation, offered carefully, the way you extend a hand to someone standing at the edge of something. "Say yes," her wolf screamed. "Say yes. Say yes right now, or I will shift us again in this yard, I swear to." "I'd like that," Iris said. She was still wearing his cloak. It was warm, and it smelled like safety, and she was absolutely not going to think about that right now. He nodded. Then he stood, turned, and walked back toward the keep. Tamsin fell into step beside him, and Iris heard, very faintly, Tamsin say, "That was the most exciting thing that has happened in this yard in 4 years." Dashiell said nothing. But Iris, who was, after all, an investigator with excellent observational skills, noticed that the tips of his ears were red. "He's blushing," her wolf reported, vibrating with triumph. "We made the king blush by taking our clothes off in his yard. This is the greatest tactical victory of our career." Iris gathered the shreds of her dignity and walked back to her chambers. She was never going to recover from this. She was also, she realized with a sinking feeling, smiling. The pack run changed everything. She'd expected something formal, organized, controlled, the way everything in Blackwood was controlled. Instead, she found a loose group of wolves gathering at the tree line behind the keep as the sun sank behind the mountains, shifting casually, shaking out their coats, nipping at each other's ears. Tamsin was already in wolf form, a lean, pale thing with watchful eyes. 2 of the sanctuary women had joined, running with the pack for the first time, their movements tentative and then, as the group began to move, increasingly free. Iris shifted at the edge of the forest, behind a supply shed, with the cloak she was absolutely going to return folded neatly on a crate. The transformation was a relief so profound it was almost painful, like finally stretching a muscle that had been cramped for weeks. Her wolf exploded into being with the enthusiasm of a prisoner released, and immediately began cataloging the scents of the forest with the dedication of a sommelier at a wine tasting. Cedar, granite dust, fox, old trail. 3 deer due north, snow runoff, and oh, that's him. Dashiell in wolf form was, there was no diplomatic way to put this, enormous. A black wolf the size of a small horse, with gray-streaked fur along his shoulders and eyes that glowed like embers in the dusk. He moved through his pack with a quiet authority that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with the way the other wolves oriented around him without being told. He was the center of gravity. He paused when he saw her, his ears came forward. He circled her once, assessing, cataloging, his scent full of something warm and complicated. And then he simply ran. The pack followed. Iris ran with them. It was the first time in months she had felt like herself. The mountain trail was steep and wild, the air sharp with pine and cold stone, and her wolf ran like it was making up for every suppressed mile. She ran beside Dashiell without planning to, their strides matching, and the wolf part of her brain, the part that didn't overthink, that just knew, filed this under correct, pack, home, and refused to elaborate. When they returned to the keep, shifting back in the moonlit courtyard, breathless and alive, Dashiell handed her the cloak without a word. His expression was soft in a way she hadn't seen before, unguarded, the king's composure stripped away by the run. "Better?" he asked. "Much," she said, and meant more than the shift. She found the cloak problem was getting worse. She had returned it, folded it neatly, left it on his desk in the study the following morning. That evening, it was draped over the back of her chair at dinner. She returned it again. It appeared on the bench outside her chamber door. The 3rd time, she carried it into his study and placed it directly on his desk while he was sitting at it. "Your cloak," she said. He looked at the cloak. He looked at her. "You're cold in the mornings. The east corridor has no heating." "I am not cold." "You were shivering yesterday." "I was not. That was—" She stopped. She had, in fact, been shivering. The mountain mornings were vicious, and her chambers were on the east side of the keep, and she had been shivering, and she had not realized he'd noticed because she had not realized he was watching. "He watches us," her wolf said, trembling with vindication. "He watches us. He noticed our temperature. This is basically a proposal. It's a cloak. A love cloak." "Keep it," he said, and returned to his papers as if the matter were settled. She kept the cloak. She wore it every morning in the east corridor, and she told herself it was practical, and her wolf told her nothing, because her wolf was too busy radiating smugness to form words. What Iris did not know, and would not know until much later when Tamsin told her with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had been saving a story for exactly the right moment, was that after Iris returned the cloak the first time, Dashiell had picked it up from his desk, held it for a moment, and pressed it to his face. He had breathed in, once. Then he had folded it with military precision, walked to the dining hall, and placed it on the back of her chair. Tamsin had been standing in the doorway. He had not seen her. "I didn't say anything at the time," Tamsin told Iris later. "I felt it would be cruel, like interrupting a man's prayers." Tamsin. "He smelled your cloak, Iris. He smelled it. The King of Blackwood, who has faced down rogue packs and border wars and once killed a man with a soup ladle during an ambush in the kitchens. That man pressed a piece of cloth to his face and inhaled like it contained the last breathable air in the kingdom. I have served him for 12 years. I have never seen him lose a battle. He has lost this one completely." It was around this time that Tamsin cornered Dashiell in the armory, which she did when she needed to have a conversation he couldn't walk away from, because the armory only had one door, and she was standing in it. "Sir, Tamsin, she's your mate." The silence that followed was the silence of a man who had been expecting this conversation and had been hoping, against all evidence and reason, that it would never arrive. "That," Dashiell said carefully, "is not a confirmed assessment. Your wolf recognized her the moment she walked through the gate. You haven't slept a full night since she arrived. You gave her your cloak, your personal cloak, the one you wore through the border campaign, the one I've seen you refuse to lend to a freezing ambassador because, and I quote, he should have packed better. You gave it to a woman you'd known for 6 days. The East Corridor is cold. The East Corridor has been cold for 9 years. You have never given anyone your cloak." Dashiell inspected a sword that did not need inspecting. "Is there a point to this briefing, Commander?" "The point, sir, is that I have watched you carry the weight of this sanctuary, this kingdom, and every name in that ledger on your own back for over a decade. And now there is a woman in your study every night who is brilliant and brave, and who chose to stay when she had every reason to run. And your response to this is to give her a cloak and pretend it's about heating?" Tamsin's voice softened, a rare event, roughly as common as a solar eclipse. "You are allowed to want things, Dashiell. You are allowed to want her." He was quiet for a long time. Then, "If she knew what my wolf decided the moment she walked through that gate, she would feel trapped, manipulated. One more alpha deciding her fate without asking. I won't do that to her." Tamsin studied him. Then she nodded once, stepped aside from the door, and said, "You're a good man, sir. A complete fool, but a good man." "Noted. I'll update the sanctuary betting pool accordingly." "The what?" "Nothing, sir." The fragile piece shattered when a rider arrived bearing the Pemberton pack seal. Her uncle himself was coming to visit his beloved niece and discuss the progress of the union. "He knows," Iris said, the scroll trembling in her hand. "This isn't a social call. He's coming to find out why his spy hasn't delivered." "Let him come," Dashiell said, his face hardening. "We play the part. The united couple. We give him nothing." "It's too dangerous. He'll search the castle." "And he will find nothing. The sanctuary is secure, but you will be his focus." "Let him try." The fierce protectiveness in her chest surprised her with its intensity. She would not let this man, her own uncle, destroy what Dashiell had built, what they were building. The night before Pemberton's arrival, Tamsin appeared at Iris's chamber door with a rolled parchment, a pot of tea, and the expression of a general preparing for a siege. "We need a strategy," Tamsin said, spreading the parchment on the bed. It was a floor plan of the castle. There were markings on it, red circles, blue arrows, and what appeared to be annotated sightlines. "You've mapped his potential routes through the castle?" Iris asked. "I've mapped his potential routes, his probable topics of conversation, his known weaknesses as an interrogator, and the optimal number of minutes you can talk about table linens before a grown alpha's will to live breaks." Tamsin pointed to a red circle near the west wing. "This is the danger zone. If he reaches this corridor, he's within scent range of the lower sanctuary. So we keep him on the east side. The east side has the rose garden. The rose garden connects to a conversation about wedding flowers. Wedding flowers connect to fabric swatches. Fabric swatches, in my experience, can incapacitate a man for up to 45 minutes. Iris stared at her. You've done this before. I've been protecting this castle for 12 years. Tamsin's eyes were perfectly steady. Not all wars are fought with swords. Some are fought with extremely detailed opinions about thread count. They spent 2 hours on the plan. By the end of it, Iris had a complete script for every meal, a series of conversational traps designed to waste Pemberton's time, and a genuine respect for Tamsin that bordered on awe. One more thing, Tamsin said, rolling up the parchment. The performance will be more convincing if you and the king appear genuinely comfortable together. We are comfortable together. You sit 4 feet apart at dinner and communicate through documents. I've seen warmer interactions between opposing ambassadors. Tamsin paused. You'll need to touch him, casually, in front of Pemberton. I can do that. Can you do it without turning the color of a winter sunset? Because you did that yesterday when he handed you a quill. Iris had, in fact, done that. It was a warm room. It was not a warm room. It has never been a warm room. That is the same excuse he uses. Tamsin gathered her materials and stood. You are both brilliant people who have somehow become completely stupid about exactly one thing, and it is each other, and I find it both exhausting and deeply entertaining. Good night. Alpha Pemberton arrived with a retinue of 6 wolves and the pomp of a man who believed himself untouchable. He was tall, taller than Dashiell, and he carried it the way some alphas do, as if height were a form of argument. He had her father's jawline and eyes as cold and flat as a winter pond. He greeted Iris with a smile that didn't reach them. Iris, my dear, he said, his voice smooth. You are looking well. Royalty agrees with you. Uncle, she sank into the perfect curtsy, the docile niece, the overwhelmed bride. King Dashiell has been most kind. For 3 days the castle became a stage. Iris and Dashiell performed a flawless charade, dining with Pemberton, walking the battlements together, maintaining the careful choreography of a couple who was still learning each other's rhythms. His hand rested formally on the small of her back when they walked, a gesture of possession for their audience of one, except that his thumb, hidden from Pemberton's view, traced a small, absent circle against her spine. And Iris's body catalogued this the way it catalogued everything about him now. Immediately, involuntarily, and with an attention to detail that had nothing to do with investigation. He's touching us, her wolf reported, as if Iris were somehow unaware. He is touching us, and it is intentional. This is the best day since the cloak. This is better than the cloak. It was for show. It is not for show. The thumb thing is not for show. Nobody does the thumb thing for show. Pemberton tried to get Iris alone, cornering her after meals, engineering moments where Dashiell was called away. She played the naive Omega, chattering about wedding tapestries and flower arrangements, until his eyes glazed over with boredom and frustration. She recounted in excruciating detail a debate with Elspeth about whether the table runners should be ivory or cream. She weaponized the very stereotype she despised. And she did it with the focused precision of a woman who had spent her entire life being underestimated and had finally found a use for it. You seem happy here, Pemberton said during one such ambush, his smile careful. I confess I'm surprised. I had worried Blackwood would be too austere for you. Oh, it was at first, Iris said, widening her eyes. But Dashiell is so attentive. He gave me his cloak, Uncle, his own cloak. Because I was cold. She sighed with exactly the right amount of vapid delight. I think he might actually care for me. Pemberton's smile tightened. He had sent her here to be a weapon, and she was performing as a lovesick bride. His patience was eroding, and she was counting the cracks. On the 3rd day, he made his move. The West Wing, he said at breakfast. I hear it's been sealed for generations. As a student of architecture, I'd be fascinated to see the old stonework. Iris's blood ran cold. Dashiell's face stayed impassive. It is structurally unsound, my lord, Dashiell said. I could not risk your safety. Nonsense. Pemberton's laugh was a sharp, unpleasant sound. Unless there is something you wish to hide. Before Dashiell could answer, Iris placed a hand on his arm. Oh, my love, she said, airy and disappointed. But you promised to show me the northern waterfalls today. The moon's blessing on our union. I'm afraid the West Wing will have to wait. It was a brilliant improvisation, a lie woven from pack tradition that couldn't be challenged without giving grave insult. Pemberton was cornered. A dark, ugly anger flashed in his eyes before he smiled tightly. Of course, the moon's blessings are paramount. As they rode toward the waterfalls, the charade momentarily forgotten, Dashiell looked at her. That was inspired. He won't give up. I know. He rode closer. Iris, when this is over, the marriage contract can be dissolved. You will have fulfilled your duty. You'll be free. Freedom. The word that had driven her entire life. But the thought of leaving Blackwood, leaving him, opened a void so sudden it stole her breath. And what if I don't want to be free? She asked, barely above a whisper. He was already looking at her. His stormy eyes held something raw and unguarded, the brooding romantic his wolf kept locked away, finally visible on his human face. I had hoped you would say that. That night, the door to Iris's chamber rattled with a frantic knock, Elspeth pale with terror. My lady, Alpha Pemberton. He brought a wolf from his retinue who used to serve in the old king's guard. The wolf knew about the lower passages, the original drainage tunnels beneath the West Wing. They found the old entrance. Iris's stomach dropped. The stone panel in Dashiell's study was the main entrance, but the castle was old. Of course there were other ways in. Pemberton hadn't come here unprepared. He'd come with someone who knew the bones of this keep. She found Dashiell in the hall, Tamsin at his side, his face a mask of cold fury. He's in the lower levels, Tamsin said. He came through the drainage access on the west side. We sealed it years ago, but the stonework was old. They broke through. Not if I get there first, Iris said. It's too dangerous. He expects you to come in force. He doesn't expect me. She met his eyes. He thinks I'm a fool, a scared Omega bride. Trust me. The war between the king and the man played across his face. The king knew she was right. The man couldn't bear to let her go. He nodded. Tamsin, silent alarm. Get everyone moving to the deeper levels. I'm right behind her. Iris ran. Barefoot, silent on cold stone. She took the main stairs down, faster than the drainage route Pemberton would have used. She could hear his sharp voice echoing from the common room and the frightened whimpers of the women. She burst in. Pemberton stood at the center, smirking, his 2 guards holding several women, including Cora. He had found them. Well, well, he drawled, the little bride. Iris forced herself to tremble. Wide eyes, tears, the mask of the terrified Omega one final time. What is this place? Who are these people? This is your king's dirty little secret. Pemberton's smile was a blade. His hidden collection. Every alpha in the southern reaches will be very interested to hear about this. No, Iris breathed. He wouldn't. Oh, he did. But don't worry, I'm here to rescue you. He gestured to his guards. Secure the evidence. We'll take a few as witnesses. While his attention was on the women, Iris screamed, a high, piercing shriek of manufactured terror, and ran. Not toward Pemberton, but deeper into the sanctuary, toward the escape tunnels. Get her, Pemberton roared. She's the key witness. He and his guards gave chase, leaving the women behind. Iris led them through the lower levels, her knowledge of the layout the only advantage. She ducked into a storage cellar, slamming the heavy door, pressing herself into the dark. Footsteps pounded past, hesitated. The door creaked open. Pemberton stepped in, torchlight cutting the darkness. Come out, little Omega. The game is over. Then another shadow filled the doorway behind him. Dashiell. Pemberton spun. My castle, my people. The king's voice was a low growl. You are not welcome here. The fight was brutally short. Dashel moved with the fluid grace of a born predator, disarming Pemberton and his guards before they could raise their weapons. He stood over the defeated lord, his wolf pressing close to the surface, his eyes glowing gold. You will leave my lands. You will tell your pack you found nothing. And you will never speak of this again. Because if you do, the truth of your own operations, every omega you have taken, every family you have destroyed, will reach every alpha territory from here to the coast. I have the ledger. Your niece has the proof. And she knows about the fire, Pemberton. Iris went still. She hadn't told Dashel about the fire, about her parents. But the way Pemberton's face drained of color told her everything she had spent 3 years trying not to know. Pemberton, his arrogance shattered, could only nod. After they were gone, escorted to the border by a grim-faced Tamsin and 4 wolves in full shift, because some messages require teeth, an exhausted silence fell over the sanctuary. Dashel found Iris in the common room, helping Cora calm a crying child. He walked toward her slowly, deliberately. He stopped in front of her, and his gaze searched her face for any sign of injury. Are you all right? I'm fine, she said, trembling with adrenaline's aftermath. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw. His thumb traced her cheek, the same absent circle he'd drawn on her spine in front of Pemberton, except this time there was no audience, no performance. Just him and her, and the truth of the gesture. You were not a weapon tonight, Iris, he said, his voice rough. You were a shield. Our shield. In front of everyone, the women of the sanctuary, Cora with tears on her face, Tamsin who had returned from the border looking grim and satisfied, he leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers. Not a kiss, something more. A vow. A recognition of a bond forged not by fate or contract, but by fire and trust, and a cold infirmary floor at midnight. Stay, he murmured against her skin. Not as Pemberton's offering, not as a political bargain. Stay as my partner, my queen. Say yes, her wolf whispered. For once, just a whisper, no screaming, no delusional interpretation, just the quiet certainty of a creature that had known from the first scent of pine and winter air. Always, Iris said. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and there it was, the thing his wolf had been hoarding behind that stoic exterior all along. Not just relief, not just gratitude, something helpless and enormous and utterly undefended, written across the face of a king who had never in his life allowed himself to be seen like this. There he is, her wolf said softly. There's our person. Cora, standing 3 feet away with a child on her hip, cleared her throat. If anyone is interested, she said, with the particular tone of a best friend who had been watching this situation develop for weeks. The infirmary has tea, and I've been making bets with the healer about when this was going to happen, so I need a precise timestamp for the record. Iris laughed. It was a watery, exhausted, slightly hysterical sound, the kind of laugh that comes from the same place as tears. Dashiell's hand was still on her face, and he was looking at her like she was a map he'd been reading wrong his entire life and had just turned right side up. He came back. Of course he came back. But it wasn't ego that brought him. 3 days after his escort to the border, a rider from the Eastern Territories arrived at Blackwood with a sealed letter for Dashiell. 2 of the packs Pemberton had been supplying omegas to, packs that had paid in sworn wolves and territory, had received word that their arrangement might be exposed. They were demanding Pemberton silence the source or return their payments. His network was unraveling, and Iris was the thread. He can't let you testify, Dashiell said, reading the intercepted correspondence Tamsin had pulled from Pemberton's own courier. The man had been careless in his panic. If you go public with what you know, every pack he supplied will turn on him to save themselves. You're not his niece anymore. You're the only witness who can bring down his entire operation. Iris was in the study with Dashiell, their study now, though neither of them had said so out loud, when Tamsin pushed through the door without knocking. That alone said everything. Tamsin always knocked. Pemberton, she said, at the gate. 20 wolves. He's demanding his niece be returned to him and the keep opened for inspection. Iris's blood went cold, then hot, then something past hot. A calm, white fury that settled into her bones like stone. 20 wolves, Dashiell said quietly. He stood, and Iris saw the king arrive. The stillness, the absolute focus. The man who had been fighting a war alone for years, and knew exactly what 20 wolves at a gate meant. How many of ours? 12 in the keep, 6 more on patrol, close enough to recall. Tamsin paused. And the sanctuary women are asking to stand. Iris looked at Dashiell. He looked at her. They're not soldiers, he said. No, Iris agreed. They're wolves who've already survived the worst thing Pemberton could do to them. They're not asking for permission. Something shifted in his face. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. Of her. Of what she was becoming in this place. They went to the gate together. The entire keep went to the gate together. Pemberton stood on the road below, flanked by his wolves, 20 of them, armed, in formation. He looked up at the walls of Blackwood and saw what he expected to see, a small, isolated pack defending a crumbling keep. What he did not expect was the crowd on the battlements. Dashiell's guards, yes. Tamsin, armed and expressionless. But also the sanctuary women, standing in a line along the wall, their faces visible, their eyes steady. Cora was among them, her auburn hair catching the wind. Sabra, who had arrived feverish and terrified 2 weeks ago, stood with her shoulders back. Anouk and Ludo, side by side. And in the center of the wall, wearing the king's cloak and standing at his shoulder like she had always been there, was Iris. "Uncle," she called down. Her voice carried across the cold air, clear and strong. "You are not welcome here." Pemberton's expression flickered. He had expected to find his niece cowering, or captive, or at the very least confused. He had not expected her standing on the wall of the man she'd been sent to destroy, wearing his colors, calling him out by name. "You have been deceived, Iris," he called back, his voice still smooth, still controlled. "This man is dangerous. Come home." "I am home," she let the word land. "And I know about the fire." The silence that followed was the loudest sound Iris had ever heard. She saw it happen, the ripple that went through Pemberton's wolves, the sideways glances, the uncertainty. They had followed their alpha here on a story about a kidnapped niece and a rogue king. The story was falling apart in front of them. "You told them I was taken, didn't you?" Iris continued. She could feel Dashiell beside her, steady as the mountain itself, letting her do this, letting her take the weapon her uncle had made of her and turn it around. "You told them the King of Blackwood was holding your niece against her will, just like you told everyone my parents died in an accident, just like you told everyone Cora was lost to rogues." She leaned forward on the battlements. "How many of your wolves know where your territory actually comes from, Uncle? How many of them know that every pack that swore you loyalty paid for it with an Omega who never came home? Ask them to look at this wall. Ask them if they recognize anyone." She watched Pemberton's wolves look up at the battlements. She watched them see Sabra, who had come from a pack 2 territories east. She watched one of them, a young wolf near the back, go very still, and then whisper a name. The formation didn't collapse all at once. That would have been too clean, too neat for the ugly thing it was. What happened was slower and worse. The wolves at the edges stopped holding formation, not retreating, just going still. A young wolf near the back took a step sideways, away from the group, his eyes fixed on a face on the wall. Then another. Then Pemberton's beta, a broad, graying wolf named Harlan, who Iris had known her entire life, turned to Pemberton and said something too quiet for the walls to hear. Pemberton snarled a response. Harlan shook his head once and stepped back. Not all of them left. 8 wolves held their ground. The ones who had been with Pemberton longest, the ones who were in too deep to walk away, the ones who had done things they couldn't undo. They stayed in formation, jaws tight, eyes forward. But 12 had broken ranks, 12 out of 20, and the math was simple. 8 wolves could not take a castle defended by 18 guards 50 determined women, and a king who had been fighting wars in the dark for a decade. Pemberton knew it. Iris could see it in the way his shoulders changed. The exact moment the alpha's posture broke and the calculator behind his eyes took over. He was not defeated. He was outmatched, today, at this gate. The difference mattered. "Stand your ground," he said to the 8 who remained. His voice had gone cold and flat. Not the smooth politician now, just a man giving an order. "We're leaving." He turned. The 8 followed. The 12 who had broken ranks didn't follow, and didn't leave. They stood on the road, looking up at the wall, looking at each other, caught between the pack they'd served and the truth they'd just been handed. Tamsin, because she was Tamsin, leaned over the battlements and called down to them. "There's food in the hall, and we could use extra hands for patrol. Take your time." Dashiell put his hand on the small of Iris's back, the thumb tracing that circle, the one that was never for show. And they watched together as Alpha Pemberton walked away with less than half the wolves he'd arrived with. "He's smaller than I remember," her wolf observed. He was, and getting smaller. That evening the sanctuary came up. It happened without a decision, without a speech. Dashiell opened the doors to the west wing, and the women who had lived beneath the keep for months, some of them for years, walked out into the main halls of Blackwood for the first time. They brought their blankets, their herbs, their children, the lopsided knitted wolves and the mended clothes, and the books they'd read by torchlight. They filled the east wing, the one that had been cold and empty, and within an hour it smelled like baking bread and cedar and home. Cora set up the infirmary in a room with actual windows. She stood in front of them for a long time, just looking at the sky, and when Iris found her there, she was crying, and it was the good kind. "You did this," Cora said. "He did this," Iris corrected. "You both did this." Cora wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I need a precise timestamp for that, too." From somewhere in the east wing, Iris heard Anouk's voice carrying through the open corridors. "The healer wins the pool. She kissed him first. He was so surprised he shifted. Pay up." "He did not shift," Iris called back, her face burning. "His eyes went gold," Cora said, without turning from the window. "That counts as a partial shift. The healer's ruling is final." "There is no healer's ruling. This is not a legal proceeding." "It is now. Anouk, fetch the ledger." Later, much later, Iris stood on the battlements of Blackwood Keep, watching the last light of the day bleed out of the sky. She was wearing his cloak. She had stopped pretending that was practical approximately 2 weeks ago. She heard his footstep behind her before she heard his voice. She knew it was him because her wolf knew, and her wolf had been right about him from the very first wall. "You're up here again," he said. "I like the view. Professional habit." "You're not a spy anymore, Iris." "No," she agreed. She turned to look at him. He was standing in the doorway to the battlements, his hair slightly too long, his face all harsh angles and soft eyes. He looked less like a king and more like a man who had finally, after years, slept through the night. "I'm something worse. I'm a queen who knows where all the documents are." That almost smile, the one she'd been cataloging since the day he crouched beside a mortified wolf in his practice yard, it was wider now. It was almost, very nearly, an actual smile. "Terrifying," he said. He came to stand beside her at the wall, close enough that their shoulders touched. Below them, the courtyard was full, not just guards and kitchen boys, but the women, the children, the wolves of Blackwood living their lives in the open for the first time. 2 pups were chasing each other across the flagstones in wolf form, tumbling over their own paws. Tamsin was yelling at someone about patrol rotations. Cora was carrying a basket of herbs across the yard, arguing cheerfully with the healer about dosages. It was loud. It was messy. It was alive. Dashiell's hand found hers on the wall. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. "Home," her wolf said. For once, Iris didn't argue. Below them, Tamsin crossed the courtyard, paused, and looked up at the 2 silhouettes on the battlements. She studied them for a moment. The king and his mate, shoulder to shoulder against the fading sky. And then she turned to a passing guard and said, in a voice that carried just far enough, Add a heating system to the east corridor. We won't be needing it as an excuse anymore.